Welcome to the Bible and Theology Matters podcast,
where we discuss all things Bible and theology.
Because it matters. What you really believe determines how you really behave.
Now, here is your host, Associate Professor of Bible Exposition at Dallas Theological Seminary
and Professor of Bible and Theology for the National Theological College and Graduate School,
Dr. Paul Weaver.
Welcome to the Bible and Theology Matters podcast. I'm your host, Paul Weaver, and on today's program, we are going to discuss Darwinism. And in our next program, we're going to discuss intelligent design. And to do so, I have a wonderful guest, Dr. Tom Woodward. Dr. Woodward is an apologist and has spoken as well as written on the subject of Darwinism. Dr. Woodward earned his bachelor's degree from Princeton, his Master of Theology from Dallas Theological Seminary, and his PhD from University of South Florida. Dr. Woodward is a fellow of the Discovery Institute in Seattle, Washington. He has spoken in over 80 universities and in 40 countries. He's been the research professor at Trinity College of Florida, and he led the C.S. Lewis Society that was established at Princeton University, but was later moved to the Trinity College campus in 1990. Dr. Woodward is the author of Doubts About Darwin, which Christianity Today gave the honor of the Book of the Year award in 2004 in the category of contemporary issues. Dr. Woodward is also the author of Darwin Strikes Back, and his most recent book is entitled The Mysterious Epigenome: What Lies Beyond DNA. Dr. Woodward, welcome to the Bible and Theology Matters podcast.
It's great to be with you. I've always loved the joining together, the meshing together of theology and Bible on one side and apologetics, and it looks like you've made a great match.
Well, thank you for that. Well, I love to talk about all issues of Bible and theology, and of course our catchphrase is because what you really believe determines how you really behave, and certainly today's subject matter is no exception, is it? Well, Dr. Woodward, would you start us out by explaining to our listening audience what the two founding principles or key components of Darwinism?
Sure, I'd be glad to. And I think it's important to understand exactly what Darwin contributed to in this theoretical structure. There's a foundational idea, principle, that Darwin built on, and even his grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, had toyed with the idea of common ancestry. In other words, all life can be traced to a common root somewhere in the past, where some pulsating microbe, some bacterium was brought into existence by a process that he didn't really get into. But then from that, there were branches and branches and more branches. And this common ancestry idea is the first of those foundational ideas, which then led him to ask the question, how do those varieties, such a diversity of species, both plants and animals and microbes, how did that whole tree of life, if you will, come about? What drove the change? And that's where he came up with this idea of natural selection, which is basically variations, and then nature is sort of this super mind. So it's kind of displacing God, although he didn't really ever say, I want you to understand this is an atheist theory. He would have lost his audience rhetorically if he'd said that. But he sort of basically gently brought in the idea of nature selecting and then developing species over time. So it's natural selection working on variations. In the 1940s, they brought in the idea of mutations, but originally Darwin didn't know about DNA, he didn't know about genetics, he didn't know what a mutation was. But so if you think of just the core value or assumption, I should say, of common ancestry, everything has a descending pattern. If you trace it far back enough, you'll hit the ground root, original ancestor. And then the second point, natural selection does all the work. The supermotor, if you will.
Dr. Woodward, you have not always been a defender of the intelligent design model. In fact, you formerly defended Darwinism as a college student at Princeton University. Would you share with us what led you to abandoning Darwinism and embracing an intelligent designer?
Sure, that'd be a lot of fun to recall those key moments in my life. I was just 18, 19, and toying with the idea of whether God existed. I'd been raised in a church, but I'd kind of dropped all those kind of traditional Christian ideas kind of by the wayside. I mean, after all, I'm being brought up in a scientific age, and I'm thinking, we can't believe in miracles any longer. We're scientifically minded. And so I entered Princeton with this view of let's get to the truth. My older brother had gone there, and he was a follower of Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, the atheist philosopher, of course, from Germany, late 1800s. And so I think, well, maybe that's the answer. And I was asking students what are their worldview, and one of them said, oh, we believe that creation is true and that God is real and that Jesus died for our sins. I'm thinking, right across the dinner table at Princeton, and I said, well, you don't really believe in creation. Oh, yeah, we think we have scientific evidence. Well, that was a bridge too far. So I basically said, I'm sorry, there's no scientific evidence for Darwinian, for creation. It's all on the side of Darwinism, 100%. And they said, well, what about this? What about that? I wasn't even listening. I was furious, almost, indignant, I guess is the word. So I had to kind of confront their leader. I went out to one of their Bible conference meetings, met the leader afterwards, and I could tell the whole story maybe on another occasion, but he basically cut to the chase. We discussed the sin issue. He brought up Christ in Isaiah 53, and even though I didn't accept Christ really in that first 2-day encounter, it set up a one-on-one Bible study, and after 6 months, I did receive Christ right at the end of my freshman year, sitting in a nearby apartment. The funny thing is, I went back to my dorm, sang to God my second prayer after receiving Christ. Lord, I don't want to get involved with this Princeton group. They're all a bunch of creationists, and I'm an evolutionist. And I can imagine God. Permission denied. And within 2 days, that whole issue had kind of poofed away like a morning fog, and I did get involved in May last month. And then that summer at a local Bible church in Princeton, someone was pointing out something about fossils. And I said, what about fossils? They're 100% pro-Darwin. And he said, no, you don't realize that there are no transitional forms? And I was like a deer in the headlamps, never heard of this. And by the way, there are these huge graveyards of dinosaur bones that show evidence of a massive, flowing of waters, just like the Noahic flood. Deer in the headlamps again. And so within 20 minutes, I flipped. I became a creationist standing at a back, table in the back of a church in Princeton, New Jersey. And I never looked back. The evidence is just beyond overwhelming in every area of creation.
Wow, that's a wonderful story. Appreciate that. How, kind of follow up, did you grow up in a church that it was a church, but not a Bible preaching, gospel preaching church, or you just never connected the pieces?
I'll not name the denomination. I'll just say it was a confluence of several Protestant groups that kept joining up. And my dad mom and dad had been Presbyterian, but the little town we were in didn't have a viable Presbyterian church, so we got involved. We got second best was this other denomination. And I think the guy that spoke to us in our catechism class, I think he really knew the Lord. But after that, we hardly ever heard much of any Bible exposition. It was, social justice and anti-Vietnam War and on and on. And so it was quite theologically liberal. The pastor, actually, after receiving Christ, I asked him what about Christ's resurrection? He said, well, his comment was very funny. He said, something happened. That's all he could say about the resurrection of Christ.
Yeah.
And I thought, there's a problem here.
Yeah.
So, but I'm just so thankful for Dallas Seminary. So many of the guys at Princeton who were influential in my life got their training here, were impacted here. Wayne Weber led the group, a Dallas grad for 20 plus years. And so it's been a wonderful nexus between Princeton and Dallas Seminary. We thank God for everything about DTS.
Wonderful. Yeah, I remember speaking with a friend of mine, maybe from the same background that you're discussing there, but he headed down to Dallas Seminary, and right before he left, his pastor pulled him aside and said, I don't believe in the resurrection. I don't believe in the virgin birth. I don't believe in the substitutionary atonement. And, that's this young man that's going off to seminary to be trained in the scriptures and who held to the orthodox teachings of the faith, and yet comes to realization that this particular minister in this particular mainline denomination was holding to just the opposite of what he was going to go study. And so that's a shame, though, isn't it?
It's a shocker.
Yeah.
It can be a shocker.
Well, in your work as a speaker and writer on creation, Darwinism, and intelligent design, you sometimes use the visual of a wave of evidence on the side of creation. Sometimes you picture it as a vast tsunami that continues to develop in front of our eyes. Can you explain what you mean, how scientific research and debate from 1980 to today is producing a towering tsunami of evidence?
Well, yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because it is an image that is very, in my view, very apropos. It's totally appropriate for what we're seeing develop, and really what we've seen develop over the last 20 to 25 years. The decay and decline of Darwinian theory has really accelerated. It's going super fast, and I think that we could see major shakeups where people at high levels in the academic, and I'm talking about biological research world, will go public. And they may not jump onto the intelligent design bandwagon, but they're basically, they have been since the big meeting at the Royal Society in London in 2016, where they came together to discuss, what is going to be, are we going to stay with Darwinism or going to develop a new theory? And these young scientists came in, and they were not in our group, they were not on the bandwagon for design. And they basically said, we're looking for a whole group of new ideas that we can kind of glue together as a replacement theory. And sometimes their rhetoric is funny. We're just going to extend. They call it the extended synthesis. Like, they don't want to say we're scuttling the boat. It's leaking. It can't even stay afloat. They just say, well, we're extending. And so when I follow the news, it is just fabulous, and it's exciting. It is a tsunami.
Well, that's exciting for me to hear, and for our listeners to hear, especially those that don't have the inside connection that you have and are following it to the level that you are. So thank you for that information. Yes. Well, this is the Bible and Theology Matters podcast. So let's talk about the Bible as it relates to our subject matter. Dr. Woodward, often you will say that the Bible is intensely science-friendly. And to some of our listeners, that may or might be a surprise, might be surprised by that statement. Can you explain why and how the Bible sounds at times like a lab report in a chemistry class?
Yeah, I remember writing lab reports when I was in high school chemistry. It was one of the most fun things I ever did. We would, produce pure oxygen, and they would burn different, little ribbons of metal, and we would do lots of fun things, and quite frankly, almost blow ourselves up half the time. But one of the things that we did is that we wrote down observations. And one of the things you find, for example, throughout the Old Testament, there is like an intense zeroing in on what is being observed in so many historical situations, even with the miraculous. And for example, one of the most interesting is the descent. Every night, God would send down the food for the next day, manna, and they would get up in the morning and gather it. And so in both Numbers and even in Exodus, you find a couple of passages that describe the manna. They even give the melting point of manna. They give its visual appearance. They describe its taste. And that's, to me, where you see this attitude of the Bible of not just throwing something out, like a little story or a symbol. It's like, wow, I remember seeing this, and then I noticed that, and I tasted this whole situation. You can see smells and tastes and touch. Jesus is referred to as the one that their hands had handled in John, 1 John, the great 5-chapter epistle of John. And you see in the book of Luke, for example, many places where Jesus went out of his way to substantiate through demonstration, what we might call a scientific demo. For example, he showed them his hands and feet, but he also said, you have something that I could snack on. I'm a little hungry. He didn't say that, I'm a little hungry, but, anything here to eat? And they showed him some broiled fish they had left over, and he took it in front of them and ate it. And I could multiply this. And so there are places in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 33, where God says, I'm so committed to you that my commitment is like the laws of nature. I would no sooner change my mind and my commitment to you, O Israel, than I would, or in that case, Judah, than I would just monkey with the laws of nature. So the laws of nature are particularly cast by the Bible as something dependable, solid, unchangeable, which is like an assumption that enables science to be done. And while I'm on a roll, if we can add one more thing, there are 9 passages that describe the universe is in a steady expansion state. God stretched out the cosmos. And those 9 passages, I think 4 of them, maybe actually 5 of them are Isaiah and Jeremiah. There's one in Zechariah chapter 12. There are others in the Psalms and elsewhere. But what you see is this confirmation now of the expanding universe, which the Bible repeatedly described in the Old Testament and was only empirically confirmed 100 years ago. Wow, we got it right 25 centuries earlier or more.
Recently, we had Dr. Thomas Schreiner on the podcast, and we were talking about the beauty of God's design and order of creation and those kind of things. And he went to seminary. He mentioned it on the podcast that he went to Fuller Seminary, and at that time they had just recently, it's not that long before that, had said the Bible is true in faith and practice, but not necessarily history and science, right? Whereas you're saying no, the Bible is inspired and inerrant without error in the original manuscripts and reliable in these areas. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it is. I mean, what I'm saying is the view of inerrancy, which evangelicals generally, and Dallas in particular, Dallas Seminary specifically, has held to, and I would trace this back to St. Augustine and earlier than that to the Church Fathers. This view is not just a recent invention; it's solidified in church history throughout. I'm having my students right now read something on this. It was put together by one of the professors at Trinity Divinity School, a fantastic piece. But anyway, the Bible is demonstrating scientifically its ability to describe nature and its ability to make all the observations consistent with what we've learned from science. So the Bible enables science, and it agrees with science. It's a great partner.
In just a moment, we'll return to our previously recorded interview. But first, our missions moment of the week. I'd like you to hear a brief testimony from one of my students from the country of Jordan. His name is Ihab.
Hello, my name is Ihab Mazahri. I'm a student at the National Theological College and Graduate School. I live in Amman, Jordan, and I'm about to graduate this summer. I became a student of NTCGS for many reasons. Most importantly, because I wanted to gain a proper understanding of the Word of the Lord and be able to interpret it correctly. I also wanted to effectively convey the truth of the Scriptures in a way that can change others' lives. Additionally, I wanted to be able to respond to all skeptics and their accusations who try to distort the character of God. NTCGS helped me achieve these goals and many more. It gave me self-confidence. It helped me sharpen my teaching talent and it helped me realize that the ultimate goal of all my action is to glorify the Lord alone. I thank the Lord for NTCGS and encourage everyone to join and to enjoy that deep understanding of the Word of the Lord and His fellowship.
If you'd like to learn more about NTCGS or how you can give to help students like Ihab, attend the National Theological College and Graduate School in Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon, or East Africa, please visit ntcgs.org. That's ntcgs.org. Thank you for your consideration. Now back to our previously recorded program. Neat. That's great. Well, you wrote an article in Dallas Theological Seminary's magazine entitled Answering Darwin. And in that article, you urge Christians to recognize a couple of things that Darwin said in his book, Origin of Species, which he's famous for or infamous for. And these statements are quite commendable and helpful. A few of them, not all of them for sure, but a few of them are commendable and helpful. And you say that knowing these facts gives us an advantage we can actually bring in Darwin as part of our witness. Can you briefly explain what those commendable components are and how we can employ them in our defense?
Sure. I just happen to have my copy here, Answering Darwin. The occasion for this is the 150th anniversary of the publication of Darwin's Origin of Species, but it was also the 200th anniversary of the birth of Darwin and Abraham Lincoln on the same day. Quirk of history. But to me, as I was writing this, I wanted to just everybody who had a chance to kind of gaze through the content to realize that Darwin, at the very beginning, in the intro of the Origin of Species, admitted that every single point, he put it very specifically in his book, could be contested. I'm just going to read what he wrote. I'm very well aware that scarcely a single point is discussed in this volume, his book, on which facts cannot be adduced, often apparently leading to conclusions directly opposite to those at which I have arrived. In other words, he's saying that you can bring out facts that would point you in the opposite direction of me. And then he adds, and I love this. This is so great. Thank you, Charles Darwin. He says, a fair result can be obtained only by fully stating and balancing the facts and arguments on both sides of each question. And my response to that is, wow. Let me give you a standing ovation for that one. Wonderful. I mean, it's maybe a rhetorical flourish, but if you isolate it and take it as serious suggestion, proposal, just how we should treat this area. But the Darwinists, I would say, since Darwin, have not followed Darwin's own advice by fairly stating and balancing the views on both sides. In other words, we need to just look at what he said and each aspect or part of it, including, I would say, his recommendation in chapter 6, basically Problems with My Theory is the name of that chapter. He says, and I just quote it from memory, if it could be demonstrated that a complex organ exists which could not have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. And based on that prediction, that sticking his neck out, if you can find a complex organ which you cannot even envision coming together step by step, my theory is it's gone, it's dead. And that's what Michael Behe did, famous philosopher of biology, but primary field, of course, is molecular biology and biochemistry. And this professor up at Lehigh University brought out his idea of machines in the cell which do not have function until all the parts are there. Therefore, they could not evolve step by tiny step. Thank you, Charles Darwin. Using your test, Darwin now flunks. And we can thank Darwin for at least sticking his neck out and making those statements here and there that we can appreciate and use.
So if only modern scientists were as honest.
It's still the dominant theory because it has so much inertia. The inertia of science is such that the bigger the theory, the longer it stood in, as it were, in front of the watching world, proclaiming, we won, we've been proven. As that persists, it poses a huge challenge for anyone to dislodge it. I think Darwinian theory is like a house of cards, to use the image of Thomas Bethel, Oxford grad, who wrote that great book, Darwin's House of Cards. And just blowing on it, it's just collapsing in front of us. And so I think that in every major point, not microevolution, I think Darwin's view of minor changes, adjustments of creatures, microevolving has always been legitimate. And so that minor theory is solid, but the major theory, the whole point of his theory is to show how all species developed, and that theory is in a state of utter and complete collapse, in my view.
Yeah. Well, in your books, Darwinism Under the Microscope and your book, Doubts About Darwin, you record the history of Darwinism and highlight the spreading cracks in its foundation. Dr. Woodward, would you please develop that for us?
Sure, I'll do this quickly because I know there are some other areas we need to cover as well, but I'll just say that Darwinian theory, which I mentioned, was established on the foundation of common ancestry, which many scientists had hinted at. They hadn't articulated it, but in the late 1700s, early 1800s, common ancestry was then supplemented. The breakthrough came when Darwin proposed natural selection as the motor, which is sending out the variety of branches. And then after that, it was fine-tuned, and then by the 1940s, they had brought in mathematical genetics, the area of mutation, and it stood pretty much unchallenged until Whitcomb and Morris. Whitcomb, famous now with the Lord, but professor, he actually was in the same Princeton evangelical group through which I came to know the Lord. He came to know the Lord.
Interesting.
Went and got his doctorate, taught at Grace Seminary for many years in the area of theology and Old Testament. And he, along with Henry Morris, whose son John Morris, I believe, was still running until recently, the Institute for Creation Research. But anyway, the Morris-Whitcomb combo, Dwayne Gish came into the equation about that same time. Those three guys hatched the modern creation movement. Starting in 1960 through the Genesis Flood book, early 60s, then that grew and grew, and then finally in 1985, the breakthrough was Michael Denton, an Australian geneticist who did not believe in God, a geneticist who at best was an open-minded agnostic. He may have some theistic belief now. I think he might have crossed the line somehow. But at that point, he wrote Evolution, a Theory in Crisis, which basically shot 1,000 holes in Darwinian theory and said that the theory is just a dogma. It's just a belief which no one has challenged because they have no replacement. And so when that book came out, it shook the whole world in 1985 and opened up these skeptics who were beginning to come together. The Ad Hoc Origins Committee came together. Philip Johnson, a law professor at Berkeley, emerged to lead the group. Charles Thaxton, a chemist, wrote with two other professors a book on the origin of life, and the movement just took off. By 1991, it was taking off like a Boeing 747 and climbing ever higher to 35,000 feet. Okay? That's my attempt to give a bit of an image.
Nice. Well, that's great. I have several points of intersection in my life with John Whitcomb. I appreciate Dr. Whitcomb. One, my pastor in southern Indiana, Columbus, Indiana, was a Grace Seminary graduate and studied under John Whitcomb. My father was at Grace College when it was called the Division, the Collegiate Division, before it was called Grace College. Right? It was just a small little thing under the seminary, and John Whitcomb was a PhD student at the time, I think, and he was a professor's assistant at that time. So my dad goes back many years. He's now with the Lord. And then as an 18-year-old at Word of Life Bible Institute, John Whitcomb was teaching for us at our Bible Institute. I was a student of his, and we read the Genesis Flood. And so he was teaching 18-year-olds for years and years up at the Word of Life Bible Institute, in addition to his responsibilities at the seminary. And of course, so thankful for him and his legacy and the books he wrote, and like you said, really getting that movement going along with Morris. So
it's amazing what God did through those few key individuals, and then now Discovery Institute is, as it were, coordinating a huge amount of the intelligent design research which is going on today, and it's expanded globally. The movement is huge in Brazil, and we could talk about that maybe in our next broadcast.
Nice.
And tell you what they've come up with in Brazil.
Yeah. Stay tuned for that one. There's a teaser for our listeners and viewers. But if you're listening or watching today and you're interested in acquiring your own copy of the book Doubts About Darwin, It's available in a newer 2016 Creation Research Institute edition, and you can find that at equip.org. That's equip.org, and follow to the products page and find doubts about Darwin. Our time is up for this week's Bible and Theology Matters podcast, but Dr. Woodward has much more to share with us on this very important subject. In our next episode, Dr. Woodward will discuss discoveries from the fossil record that have been a source of embarrassment to Darwinists. We will also discuss key defactors from Darwinianism to intelligent design, and we'll also begin discussing what is meant by intelligent design. If you're a regular listener to the Bible and Theology Matters podcast and you have benefited from our programming, would you consider giving just a $5 or $10 a month donation, the price of just 1 or 2 coffees a month? Presently, we're a very small operation. My wife and I do all the video capturing, editing, and social media posting, and we've not made any significant financial appeals up to this point. But we do have costs that we incur, and we'd love to be able to hire someone part-time to do some of the video editing and audio editing so that I can focus more on theological education, writing, and missions. If you'd like to help with even just a few dollars a month and receive a tax-deductible receipt, you can do so. Go to BibleandTheologyMatters.com. That's BibleandTheologyMatters.com, and click on the Give link. Thanks for your prayerful consideration.
Bible and Theology Matters podcast is a listener-supported podcast
devoted to helping Christians grow in their knowledge of the Word of God and in their relationship to the God of the Word.
To learn how you can partner with the Bible and Theology Matters podcast,
visit us at BibleandTheologyMatters.com. That's Bible, A-N-D, TheologyMatters.com.